All right, brace for impact. You're dead asleep until your alarm miraculously shocks you back to life as if it's giving you a second chance to live. But you would much rather take a hard pass because you know the second you get out of bed, you're going to have to own and face what's to come. You're disoriented because you can't tell if it's AM or PM. It takes longer than it should to realize that you're in your own bed if you were smart enough to not end up in somebody else's. And you cannot seem to locate that time machine that apparently transported you home. You find your phone and you violently hit snooze as if it did something to you other than wake you up, probably a lot later than it should have. And so you lie there with your eyes closed and a headache so big you can actually hear it. And you take a couple deep breaths because you know that for the next 9 long, agonizing minutes, you've got to drag yourself back through hell trying to piece together what happened last night. And why your hand is immobile, tightly wrapped in gauze, and soaked through with dried blood. My name is Jason Lay. I'm the CEO of Better Drinking Culture. We are a social grassroots movement with the impact mission to shift our culture's relationship with alcohol in a healthier and more positive direction because hangovers suck. In my role with BDC, I have to be pretty transparent in my relationship with alcohol. The truth is, if I am not very intentional about every single time I choose to drink now for the right reasons, I could very easily regress to the version of me who hated waking up in the morning and looking himself in the mirror through bloodshot eyes with a pit in his stomach and hurt in his heart that no one is supposed to feel. I acknowledge that who I have to be for BDC, but more importantly, who I want to be for myself, is very much in contrast and a little ironic to who I used to be. I used to be the life of the party until almost always, without fail, I was also the one to kill it. I'd like to share the story about the day after I graduated from Michigan State in 2001. Less than 24 hours after walking across the stage at the Breslin Center in East Lansing, I found myself in the emergency room at Sparrow Hospital getting my right hand sewn back together. Because just a couple hours earlier, I showed up at my own graduation party already drunk with 2 items. 25 if we're splitting hairs, a case of Red Bull and a half gallon of Jaeger. If you can believe it, back then, before the Jersey Shore was a thing, Jaeger bombs were disgustingly popular. So, I reached into the bag to pull out that bottle of Jaeger to ceremoniously shove this party into the next gear with zero regard for whether or not anyone else there was ready for it. And the girl I was dating at the time, Heather, very, very compassionately, out of concern for my well-being and safety, suggested that I should probably pump the brakes and not have too much more to drink, because I think by that point, and I'm talking like 1 o'clock in the afternoon, I had already gotten through a fifth of Captain Morgan. I was way, way too drunk for my own good. And very distinctly out of character, because that's who you become when you're wasted in front of all of my friends. I looked Heather in the eye and I told her to shut the F up. And then I grabbed the bottle of Jaeger out of intoxicated frustration and I slammed it down on a brick ledge. It didn't just break. That thing shattered into an obscene amount of jagged shards of green glass. As soon as it happened, I knew I was in trouble. I could feel the warm spring air very uncomfortably now on the inside of my exposed hand, and the blood already starting to go down my arm. I couldn't look at it. My best friend at the time, still is, Corey huddled around me, rushed me into the house so that we could rinse it off and assess the damage. And he could tell I was starting to freak out because I was watching so much of my own blood disappear down the kitchen sink. So by now, I've got a crowd in the kitchen surrounding me. You know why? Because everyone wants to see what happened to the drunk guy. Their responses didn't help. It was, oh, ooh, dude. Oh. And some of them exited as fast as they entered, as soon as they got a look of what they came to see. Okay, so now I'm starting to panic, and I look over at Corey, who's helping me try to hold it together, and I was like, man, is it that bad? And being very honest, he goes, yeah, dude, it's bad. You're going to need stitches. And I'm like, really? You think? And I'm like, call 911. He's like, you sliced your hand. You didn't lop off an entire limb. We're not going to call 911, but somebody is going to have to get you to the hospital like now. Heather, who had been standing off in a corner of the kitchen, quiet this entire time, she cuts through the noise and the chaos, and everyone in there can literally hear her roll her eyes as she says, I'll take him. Because the irony is, Heather was the only sober person at the party. So guess who had the privilege of driving the drunk guy to the hospital? Do I have to tell you how awkward that ride was? So now we're sitting there. She's next to me, and I'm getting my hand stitched up by, I'll admit, a young, pretty attractive doctor who, let's be honest, had a lot more going on for himself than I did at that moment. Mid-stitch, I kid you not, she asks him out. I felt the needle in the thread like stop, and I look down at him. He looks up at me with this oddly respectful look on his face like, dude, what do you want me to do here? And I leaned in. Keep in mind, my hand is literally in his. And I whisper, you can have her. So on the way back to the party, note, I didn't say home because I had unfinished business to attend to. I made Heather detour to a local liquor store so I could reimburse what I broke. So we get back to the party. She helps me slide out of the passenger seat of her SUV, and I've got my discharge papers under this arm, and I've got my shiny new bottle of Jaeger in this hand because that's the only one that works. And as we start to walk up to the house, I'm like, you're not coming in here. Get in your car, leave. That's the last time I ever spoke to her. The last thing I remember about that night, about one monumental milestone in my life that should be a lot more memorable, was walking through the front door to applause for what I can only assume was one-upping a pukin' rally. So I gave a bunch of awkward left-handed high fives because I didn't show up empty-handed. And the rest of the night, lights out. I have no idea. That story is one of 100, maybe more. It's not even the worst one. I don't believe you have to hit rock bottom in order to classify a singular event or a really rough season in your life as a failure. However, perpetually repeating the same stupid mistakes over and over and over, especially when you know the results are going to be consistently laced with compounding negative consequences, well, they may in fact justify a failure at that point. But what's crazy is that we don't recognize it when it's happening. Because what's interesting is all of those little failures, they sneak in and they start very subtly to make the embarrassment of a silly social faux pas seem like amateur hour. They're worse than what you feel with regret. It blows regret off the radar. Can't even touch it. Over time, those escalating mistakes start to harden and solidify into shame. Shame is the sense of the irreversibility in knowing that an apology, no matter how sincere, can't take it away. That internal awareness, those painful, deep to your core feelings of humiliation and distress, that's the consciousness of realizing you are not in a good place. Fair warning, there will be collateral damage. Shame is you versus you. And both of you lose.